Welcome the Lord's chosen. They laughed while digging your grave, but forgot you were planted, not buried. It's funny how your enemies confuse divine setup with defeat. They mistook the silence after your fall for the end credits, not realizing God was only switching scenes. Every chosen one goes through that eerie calm before heaven flips the script, the moment when everyone thinks it's over, but the author is just clearing the stage. The brutal truth is, your enemies didn't just underestimate you, they underestimated timing. They thought you were losing momentum, but you were actually being recalibrated. When the spotlight turned off, they relaxed, posted victory quotes, and started motivational speaking about your downfall. Meanwhile, heaven was busy updating your access level. Psychologists say that when people witness someone rise above what was meant to destroy them, it creates cognitive dissonance. Their mind literally struggles to process how the underdog won without their permission. And that's exactly what's happening now. Your enemies are not just shocked, they're mentally buffering, trying to reload a version of reality where you were supposed to stay broken. See, their awakening wasn't gentle or poetic. It was brutal. It was the kind of awakening where pride meets proof, and denial has nowhere left to hide. The tables didn't just turn, the entire dining room got rearranged. Now, the same mouths that mocked you have gone suspiciously quiet, and the silence they once used as a weapon has become their punishment. The chosen ones were never meant to clap back. They were designed to outgrow the battlefield. And when you finally did, your enemies had to face what they tried to bury, the realization that you were never the problem. You were the prophecy they mishandled. Welcome to the aftermath, where their awakening begins and your assignment continues. Number 1, they finally realized you were the test, not the target. They finally realized you were the test, not the target. For a long time, they believed the goal was to break you, to make you question yourself, to pull you down from a place they didn't even understand. They thought they were winning because you stayed calm, because you didn't fight back the way they expected. They thought your silence meant defeat. But what they didn't know was that the whole situation was never about proving your strength. It was about revealing their character. You were sent into their lives, not to be destroyed by them, but to expose what lived inside them. When faced with light they couldn't manipulate. When you entered their space, something in you disrupted their comfort, not because you attacked them, but because your presence carried truth, and truth naturally irritates the false. They projected, lied, mocked, and manipulated, because deep down they were being measured. Every action, every word, every betrayal was their response to a spiritual test they didn't even know they were taking. And the hardest part for them now is realizing that you were never fighting for survival. Heaven was simply watching how they handled someone anointed. You didn't fail when you cried. You didn't fail when you walked away. You passed when you refused to match their energy, when you stayed grounded in grace even while they tried to stain your name. Your patience was your proof. They didn't see it then, but your restraint was the evidence that you were on assignment. What they called weakness was actually spiritual discipline. Now that truth has settled, they're forced to look back and see the pattern, how every time they tried to harm you, something in their life began to unravel. It wasn't coincidence, it was consequence. The moment they realized you weren't the target but the test, regret became their teacher. They finally understood that what they were fighting against was never just you. It was what you represented: integrity, purpose, divine favor. And now the same people who plotted your downfall are studying their own downfall, wondering how the story flipped so quickly. The test results are in, and your endurance wrote their report card. You were never their victim. You were their revelation. Number 2, their power was borrowed from your silence. They mistook your silence for weakness, not realizing it was the only thing keeping their illusion alive. Your calm made them feel powerful because they confused your restraint for submission. They thought they had control because you didn't defend yourself, because you didn't expose what you knew, because you chose peace over petty wars. But your silence wasn't fear, it was management. You were managing your energy while they were wasting theirs trying to prove something. For a long time they operated on borrowed authority. Their influence, confidence, and sense of superiority were all sustained by your reaction. The moment you stopped entertaining their games, the energy they depended on vanished. They didn't realize that your attention was their currency. Every time you replied, explained, or tried to make them understand, you were unknowingly feeding their ego. But when you went quiet, their power source dried up. They began to crumble under the weight of their own pretense. People who thrive on control can't survive without chaos. They need your emotion to validate their existence. They need your frustration to remind them they still matter. That's why your silence was never weakness. It was strategy. You stopped giving them access to the emotional power they abused. And that's when they started losing control. You took away the only leverage they had, your attention. Once you did that, they realized their power had been rented, not owned. When you chose peace, they had to meet themselves, without the distraction of your energy. They had to face the truth that their confidence was performance-based, not spirit-based. Their identity depended on how much they could provoke you. But when you stopped responding, they had to face the emptiness behind their loudness. That's when the illusion cracked. Now they know the truth. They weren't in control, they were dependent. Their strength was an act that could only survive as long as you played your role. The moment you stepped out of the script, the whole production fell apart. They lost the stage, the spotlight, and the story. Your silence didn't just end the argument, it ended the illusion. And the most brutal part of their awakening is realizing that the power they thought they had was actually yours all along. Number 3, they played superior until heaven pulled their credentials. They acted superior until heaven pulled their credentials. For a while, they moved like they were untouchable, loud, confident, and overly sure of themselves. They spoke as if truth was something they owned, not something they borrowed. Their arrogance wasn't rooted in strength. It was rooted in illusion. They were standing on a platform built from manipulation and pretending it was authority. But spiritual power can't be faked forever. Eventually, the source checks the license, and when heaven reviewed theirs, it was found expired. They had influence because you allowed them proximity. They had status because people believed their act. But divine timing always reveals what human perception can't. At first, it looked like they had control. They were winning, admired, even feared. But everything they built came from pretending to have access to something they didn't. They claimed wisdom, but practiced deception. They played righteous, but lived dishonest. They used your humility to elevate their ego. And for a while it worked, until truth decided to speak. When heaven revokes someone's spiritual license, their words lose weight. The same people who once believed them start to feel confused. Their charm stops working. Their manipulation stops landing. Conversations that used to win sympathy suddenly fall flat. It's not that people changed. It's that the covering over their deceit got lifted. What they used to do effortlessly now requires performance, and they can't sustain it. The energy behind their authority disappears because it was never rooted in truth. Now, they're standing under the same spotlight that used to make them glow, but it exposes instead of flatters. They're being seen for who they really are, not the mask, not the performance, but the person behind the illusion. The superiority they once flaunted has turned into isolation because no one trusts what's unstable. The charisma that used to attract now repels. Their spiritual arrogance led them to believe they were chosen when they were merely allowed to exist near chosen people. That's the brutal awakening. Realizing that access to divine things doesn't mean ownership of them. Their power was a temporary pass, not a permanent position. And once heaven pulled their credentials, everything built on pretense fell apart. They thought they were the authority, but they were only actors waiting for the curtain to drop. And now that it has, the stage feels colder than they ever imagined. Number 4, their strategy worked until you stopped caring. They had a strategy, and for a while it worked perfectly. They knew exactly how to push your buttons, when to provoke you, and how to twist situations to make you look like the problem. Their goal was never peace, it was control. They weren't interested in understanding you. They just wanted to manage how others perceived you. Every reaction you gave them was a small victory, because it proved they still had influence over your emotions, and as long as you cared, they felt powerful. They built an entire system around your sensitivity. They studied what triggered you, what made you defend yourself, what made you explain too much. They used that knowledge like currency, stirring drama, spreading half-truths, and acting innocent while watching you try to make sense of the chaos they created. You were busy trying to clear your name, not realizing that defending yourself was the trap. The more you explained, the deeper you fell into their web. They didn't want resolution, they wanted reaction. But then something shifted. You stopped caring, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You realized their validation was worthless, and their approval was poison dressed as peace. You understood that every time you tried to prove your side, you were feeding the very narrative they built. So you went quiet, not to hide, but to heal. And that's when everything collapsed for them. When you stopped reacting, their entire structure of manipulation started starving. Their influence dried up because it had nothing left to feed on. They began to lose control over how people saw you, and that terrified them. They tried to bait you again, hoping you'd give them something. An argument, a post, a response, anything to keep the game alive. But you had evolved past their reach. You stopped caring about being understood, and that's when you truly became free. Now they're frustrated because their strategy no longer works. Their words echo into silence, their gossip finds no audience, and their attempts to provoke you only expose them. They used to thrive on your reactions, now they're haunted by your indifference. You didn't fight back, you simply outgrew the fight. And in doing so, you took away the one thing they couldn't live without, your energy. Number 5, the betrayal didn't break you, it broke their access. They thought betraying you would ruin you. They expected you to fall apart, to lose your faith, to become bitter enough to resemble them. They wanted to see you spiral so they could feel justified in what they did. In their mind, the betrayal was a weapon, a final blow that would make you crumble. But what they didn't understand was that betrayal doesn't break the chosen. It refines them. It doesn't destroy faith, it distills it. What they meant for harm became the filter that purified your spirit. And when the purification was complete, their access was gone. They were used to getting away with everything, using your kindness as a key. Every time they needed validation, forgiveness, or a safe place to dump their guilt, they came to you. You were their emotional charger. But betrayal changed the code. Heaven updated your system, and their old password stopped working. They can't reach you spiritually, mentally, or emotionally anymore. Not because you became cold, but because heaven upgraded your boundaries. The connection was divine, and once they corrupted it, heaven shut the gate. They can still talk about you, but they can't touch you. They can still remember you, but they can't reach you. That's the part that hurts them most. They can see your glow, but they can't access the source. They sense your growth, but can't participate in it. They've been locked out of the very energy they once took for granted, not by your choice, but by divine order. Betrayal has a strange way of cleaning your circle. It reveals who was loyal to your presence and who was loyal to your purpose. When someone betrays a chosen one, they don't just lose the relationship, they lose divine access. And no amount of apology can reopen a door heaven has sealed. Now they knock, but the door doesn't respond. They call your name, but the connection drops. It's not revenge, it's justice. They thought they broke you, but all they broke was their own bridge to grace. The betrayal didn't end your story. It ended their permission to be part of it. You didn't lose them. They lost the privilege of being in proximity to your peace. Number 6. They woke up to see you become what they pretended to be. They spent years trying to build an image that looked like what you were born to be. They studied you, copied your tone, your kindness, your strength, even your way of speaking truth without sounding arrogant. They mimicked your authenticity like it was a trend they could master through imitation. To everyone else, they looked the part. Wise, spiritual, confident, chosen. But you can't fake energy. You can't rehearse essence. Eventually, life gives every imitation a test, and only the real can pass. That's when the roles reversed. They woke up one day and saw you living, naturally and effortlessly, everything they had been performing. Their entire identity had been built on presentation. They wanted to be seen as evolved, grounded, and anointed, but it was all branding without becoming. They were obsessed with appearances, not alignment. They didn't understand that while they were perfecting their image, you were perfecting your inner world. While they were rehearsing lines, you were building roots. And when the storms came, the difference showed. Their performance couldn't hold under pressure, but your character could. Now they're exhausted trying to maintain the illusion. Every day feels like a performance review because nothing in their life feels stable. The validation they once lived off no longer sustains them because people have started to notice the cracks. Meanwhile, you're walking in peace. Not because life is perfect, but because you've become congruent. Who you are inside finally matches how you show up outside. That's what integrity does. It makes life lighter because there's nothing left to hide. They're frustrated watching you become what they only pretended to be. The same grace they tried to manufacture through manipulation is now resting on you effortlessly. It's not that you were trying harder, it's that you were becoming truer. What they built for attention, you became through surrender. And now the comparison is no longer even. They have the costume, but you have the calling. They have the applause, but you have the anointing. The painful truth for them is realizing they could have grown too, if they hadn't wasted time pretending. While they were busy curating an image of greatness, you were actually evolving into it. Their awakening wasn't just brutal, it was humbling, because they finally saw what authenticity looks like when it graduates from imitation to embodiment. Number 7, they didn't lose you. They lost divine protection disguised as you. They never understood that your presence carried weight. You weren't just another person in their life. You were a layer of divine protection they didn't even know they had. Your prayers, your patience, your kindness, your energy, all of it served as a spiritual shield that softened the blows life was sending their way. They mistook your care for ordinary affection, not realizing that being connected to you meant being covered by grace. You were a stabilizing force in their chaos, a quiet intercessor standing in the gap while they played reckless. They thought they could mistreat you and keep winning. They thought your love was unconditional, even while they disrespected it. But the truth is, heaven keeps records of how its vessels are handled. And when they cross that line, the covering lifted, not out of spite but out of divine law. You can't dishonor what protects you and expect to stay protected. The grace that once surrounded them began to fade, and suddenly, things that never used to go wrong started collapsing. Relationships cracked, opportunities dried up, peace turned into confusion. Nothing they touched flowed the same because the energy that balanced their instability, you, was gone. It wasn't punishment, it was consequence. God doesn't allow misuse to continue unchecked. Your presence had been a form of mercy, buying them time to change. You absorbed what would have destroyed them, prayed away storms they never knew existed, and loved them past their own self-sabotage. But mercy has an expiration date when it's consistently abused. Once you stepped back, heaven stepped aside too, because you were the bridge it was using to reach them. Now they're starting to realize it. They replay moments in their mind, wondering why life suddenly feels heavier. They can't pinpoint it, but deep down, they know something sacred is missing. It's not just you, it's the peace that came with you. It's the quiet favor that used to follow them when they were near you. That wasn't luck, that was covering. They thought they lost a person, but what really left was the spiritual protection that stood between them and their own consequences. You weren't their shield because you tried to be. You were their shield because heaven assigned you to be. And when they mishandled that assignment, the protection retracted. Now they're standing in the open, learning the hard way that losing you wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual exposure. Number 8, the game ended. When you realized you were never playing, they spent so much time plotting, scheming, and strategizing as if life were a game they could win by outsmarting you. They studied your reactions, waited for weakness, and celebrated what they thought were small victories. But while they were busy trying to manipulate outcomes, you were somewhere else entirely, healing, growing, unlearning, and becoming self-aware. You stopped participating in the drama without even realizing it. You weren't playing anymore, and that's when everything they'd built around you fell apart. The game only works when both players are engaged. When you put your peace above the competition, their entire strategy became useless. Their moves started falling flat because you weren't feeding the energy they depended on. They tried to provoke you, but you no longer bit the bait. They tried to guilt you, but your healed version didn't respond to manipulation. They tried to win arguments that no longer existed because you stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. The same tactics that once worked lost all power because growth changes the rules. What used to offend you now only educates you. What once made you chase now makes you detach. That shift wasn't loud, it was internal, but it dismantled everything. It's funny how powerless chaos becomes when you stop reacting to it. The whole web they spun was built on your participation, your anger, your confusion, your defense. Once you walked away from the game, they were left shadowboxing with their own projections. Now, their attempts at warfare look immature, even embarrassing, because they're fighting battles that no longer have an opponent. You evolved beyond the frequency where their tactics work. Your peace became your protest. Your silence became your win. They can't understand why what used to trigger you now meets calm. They can't accept that the version of you they were trying to destroy no longer exists. They're stuck rehearsing old strategies for a player who left the field. The truth is, you didn't win because you played better. You won because you stopped playing altogether. You realized life wasn't a game of survival. It was a lesson in alignment. And once you understood that, the scoreboard vanished. They're still playing for attention, but you're walking in purpose. And that's a game they were never equipped to compete in. Number 9, they finally met the reflection. They built through you. They spent so much time trying to make you look like the villain that they didn't realize they were writing their own future. Every lie, every rumor, every twisted version of your story was really a reflection of what lived inside them. They called you fake while performing authenticity. They called you jealous while secretly competing. They called you toxic while feeding off your peace. What they didn't know is that life has a way of turning projection into proof. The energy they sent out didn't just disappear. It circled back, matured, and came home wearing their name tag. For a while it worked. People believed their words because they were loud and convincing. They built a reputation off your silence, constructing a version of you that existed only in their imagination. But truth has patience. It doesn't rush to defend itself. It waits. And when the time came, life simply held up a mirror. Suddenly the same flaws they accused you of became their reality. The same chaos they said you caused started unfolding in their own world. The image they tried to stain you with became their own reflection. They thought they were exposing you, but all they did was reveal themselves. Every insult they threw at you was really a confession they didn't understand they were making. The darkness they projected became their environment, and the lies they told became lessons written in their own handwriting. That's why their life started to feel familiar. It's filled with the very shadows they cast on you. They weren't cursed. They were simply meeting their own energy. It's a brutal kind of justice, the quiet kind that doesn't need witnesses. You didn't have to defend yourself. Life did it for you. Every story they told about you became their own storyline, and every accusation turned into a mirror they couldn't look away from. That's the irony. They wanted everyone to see you as broken, but now they're the ones trying to glue their image back together. You didn't have to fight back because truth never needs an army. All you had to do was keep growing. And now, while you stand free and unbothered, they're living inside the reflection they built, surrounded by the consequences of their own words, finally realizing that every projection eventually comes home for recognition. Number 10, they didn't fear losing you. They feared being exposed by you. They were never truly afraid of losing you. They were afraid of being revealed in your presence. You carried a kind of light that made it impossible for people to hide behind their masks. You didn't have to call them out. Your authenticity did that on its own. Your peace disturbed their performance. Your honesty made their manipulation obvious, and your growth showed just how stagnant they really were. To them, you weren't just a person. You were a mirror they couldn't control, and that's what scared them the most. They weren't fighting you. They were fighting exposure. Every time you walked into a room, their energy shifted because your presence made their intentions visible. You were too genuine, too grounded, too clear. They couldn't play games around someone who saw through them without even trying. Your peace was proof that their chaos was self-inflicted. Your composure was evidence that control wasn't strength, alignment was. And no matter how hard they tried to compete, copy, or convince others otherwise, they could never duplicate that kind of authenticity. That's why they picked fights that made no sense. That's why they gossiped, twisted your words, and tried to make you look unstable. It wasn't about disliking you. It was about disarming you. They hoped that if they could destroy your reputation, they could silence the truth your energy kept revealing. You didn't have to expose them. Your wholeness did that naturally. People who thrive on pretending can't survive around someone who's real without effort. You were a walking contradiction to everything false about them. Losing you wasn't their real fear. Being seen by you was. Because when you're around someone who embodies truth, the games stop working. You can't manipulate clarity, and you can't fake alignment. You didn't even have to speak. Your peace exposed the noise in their soul. Now that you're gone, they're surrounded by people who tolerate their act, and it feels empty. No one mirrors their truth back to them anymore. The spotlight that used to blind them is gone, and all that's left is the raw reflection they used to hide from. They didn't fear your absence, they feared your awareness, because deep down they always knew that your light wasn't competing, it was convicting. Number 11. Their karma didn't arrive, it graduated. What they're facing now isn't bad luck or coincidence, it's graduation day for everything they planted. Life didn't forget what they did. It just waited until the lessons reached maturity. Karma doesn't rush. It observes, it calculates, and it delivers at the perfect moment when the impact will teach, not just sting. Every lie they told, every manipulation they justified, every mask they wore was a seed. And just like any seed, it needed time to grow. What's unfolding in their life now isn't random, it's harvest season. They thought they got away with it because nothing happened immediately. They took your silence as weakness, your forgiveness as permission, and your peace as proof that they'd escaped consequence. But time doesn't erase what energy records. The universe doesn't forget the frequency of your actions. It just waits until you're surrounded by the same energy you once created. That's why their karma isn't sudden. It's sophisticated. It comes in familiar forms, wearing faces that look like their choices, speaking the same lies they once used. Now, they're meeting versions of themselves through other people. The same manipulation they once dished out is now being served back to them with precision. The betrayal they excused as just being honest is now their new reality. They're being treated with the same disregard they once called confidence. It's not revenge, it's reflection. The cycle always returns to the source, and when it does, it speaks their language fluently. Karma didn't come to destroy them. It came to educate them. It arrived not with rage, but with order. It's showing them how cause and effect truly works, how energy is never lost, only transferred. The pain they caused others didn't vanish. It simply matured until it became relatable. Now they understand the weight of what they did, not because someone told them, but because they're living it. This is why your peace was never wasted. You didn't have to seek revenge or force accountability. Time handled that for you. Their karma didn't show up as chaos. It evolved into comprehension. What they're facing is not punishment. It's recognition. The energy they released found its way back, wiser, sharper, and fully fluent in their own tone of deceit. Their lessons finally speak their language, and there's no misunderstanding the message now. Number 12, you were the blueprint they rejected and the consequence they inherited. You were never just a passing influence in their life. You were the model, the map, the living example of what alignment truly looks like. But they couldn't see it. They were too distracted by pride to recognize that you were carrying something meant to guide them. Instead of learning from you, they competed with you. Instead of receiving your insight, they mocked it. They wanted your results without your refinement. They copied your mannerisms, your tone, your style, even your peace, thinking they could imitate your essence and get the same outcome. But what they didn't understand is that the blueprint only works when it's followed, not faked. You were showing them a path, one that required humility, consistency, and surrender. But they wanted shortcuts. They wanted power without process, influence without integrity. So they dismissed the very wisdom that could have built their foundation. They called you too deep, too serious, or too spiritual, not realizing those very qualities were the instructions for survival in seasons they weren't ready for. The same blueprint they laughed at became the one thing they'd later wish they hadn't rejected. Now they're standing in the ruins of their rebellion, the broken pieces of choices made out of ego and imitation. They tried to build their own version of what you carried, but because it lacked authenticity, it couldn't last. What was meant to be solid became temporary. What could have been legacy turned into lesson. They're now living inside the consequences of ignoring the design. Every crack in their foundation whispers the truth. The plan worked, but only for the one it was meant for. Meanwhile, you're thriving, not because life has been easy, but because you followed the instructions they refused to read. You let the process break you so that purpose could rebuild you. You paid attention when others were distracted. You stayed obedient when others were obsessed with optics. And that's why the same principles they mocked have now become your stability. Their awakening is harsh but fair. They're finally realizing that what they rejected wasn't just you, it was divine order. You were the blueprint they overlooked, and now they're forced to live within the consequences of that decision. The irony is that they could have stood beside you in purpose, but by refusing to understand you, they built a future that only exists because they ignored the pattern heaven tried to hand them. Number 13. What they called isolation was actually divine eviction. When God pulled you away, it looked cruel at first. The distance felt personal. You wondered why certain people suddenly fell off, why conversations went dry, why connections that once felt essential started to crumble for no clear reason. It felt like isolation, like rejection. But it wasn't. It was divine eviction, a cleansing so strategic that even you didn't recognize it at first. God wasn't punishing you. He was protecting you. And in the process, he was exposing what couldn't be seen while you were still present. Your absence became the test they never prepared for. When you were around, your spirit covered more than you realized. You carried grace that balanced the atmosphere. You carried truth that kept things in order. But once heaven pulled you out, the real nature of those around you surfaced. The masks fell, the charm faded. The manipulation that was once subtle became visible. It wasn't that you changed, it was that your presence had been shielding their dysfunction. Without you, what was hidden became loud. That's the power of divine removal. It reveals what your loyalty kept hidden. It's a painful kind of revelation because your heart still cared. You wanted to help, to stay, to fix things. But heaven knew that your compassion was covering corruption. You were protecting people God was trying to confront. So he did what you couldn't. He separated. And though it felt like isolation, it was really purification. You weren't being left out. You were being lifted out. Now the silence speaks louder than confrontation ever could. They're feeling the absence of what they once took for granted. The peace you brought, the clarity you carried, the grace that followed you. When God evicts corruption, he doesn't make an announcement. He simply withdraws his vessels. And that's what you were, a vessel of covering that heaven reclaimed. Their awakening came not from your words, but from your absence. Without your presence, they had to face the truth of who they were without borrowed light. That's why the silence hurts them. It's not just quiet, it's consequence. You weren't isolated, you were extracted. God didn't move you out of their life to leave you empty. He did it to leave them exposed. Number 14, the awakening was brutal because the truth was inevitable. They always knew who you were, even when they pretended not to. The truth was never hidden, it was just inconvenient. Admitting your strength, your calling, your resilience would have forced them to confront their own insecurities, and that was something they weren't ready to do. So they mocked what they secretly admired, dismissed what they couldn't duplicate, and denied what their spirit already recognized. But truth doesn't disappear just because people refuse to acknowledge it. It waits, and when it finally arrives, it doesn't knock politely. It kicks down the door. That's why their awakening was so brutal. They weren't shocked that you rose. They were haunted by the fact that they saw it coming and still chose disbelief. They had opportunities to do right by you, to honor the connection, to correct their envy, to clean up their energy. Instead, They doubled down on denial, convincing themselves that you would never recover, never rise, never become what God said you were. Their ego made them blind to what heaven had already stamped as permanent. So when your breakthrough came, real, undeniable, and loud enough for the world to see, it confronted every lie they'd told to protect their pride. The pain they feel now isn't about your success. It's about their exposure. Your rise didn't embarrass them, their disbelief did. They built an entire narrative around your supposed failure, and now they're trapped in the ruins of their own assumptions. That's why their reaction isn't shock, it's shame. Denial delayed the pain, but it couldn't erase it. The truth they avoided has now become their teacher, and it's giving lessons without mercy. There's no anesthesia for this kind of awakening. It cuts straight through pride. It forces reflection. It rewinds memories. It reminds them of every time they laughed, doubted, or gossiped. The same mouth that mocked now has to watch your manifestation. The same heart that judged now wrestles with regret. It's not vengeance, it's revelation. They called it luck, timing, or coincidence, but deep down they know better. This was divine order playing out exactly as it was written. The truth was inevitable. It only waited for you to heal enough to carry it. And now that it's here, denial has nowhere left to hide. The story of the chosen ones is never simple, and it's never quiet. It's a symphony of timing, resilience, and divine orchestration. A narrative where every betrayal, every insult, every attempt to diminish you was never about you, but about revealing the true nature of those around you. Your enemies didn't lose you. They lost access to something far greater than themselves. They mistook your silence for weakness, your patience for submission, and your absence for defeat. Yet, every moment was recalibrating their world while simultaneously raising yours. What they thought was chaos was actually your purification. What they mistook for vulnerability was your preparation. And what they assumed would break you became the very catalyst for your ascension. Every act of manipulation, every lie, every projection they cast upon you came full circle. Their gossip turned into prophecy. Their strategies evaporated when you stopped engaging, and their arrogance crumbled when they realized you were never playing their game. Their denial delayed the inevitable, but the truth always arrives. Your rise was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving yourself aligned, anchored, and untouchable by anything that is not meant for you. The very traits they tried to steal, integrity, resilience, faith, and grace, became the armor that not only protected you but exposed them in ways no argument or confrontation ever could. In the end, what they faced wasn't punishment. It was revelation. Their disbelief collided with inevitability. Their projections collided with your authenticity, and their illusions collided with the unmistakable evidence of divine design. They were confronted by a reflection they never wanted to see, that everything they tried to destroy had been designed to elevate you. They weren't defeated by force. They were undone by truth, your truth, anchored in purpose and radiating a power they could never replicate. So if you've been watching, feeling the weight of your own journey, know this. Your silence is never wasted, your patience is never unnoticed, and your growth is never irrelevant. You don't need to fight every battle. Sometimes the most devastating victories are won simply by living fully aligned and letting truth do the work. If this message resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel for more insights that challenge, awaken, and elevate. Like this video to show your support, share it to awaken someone else, and comment below to join the conversation. Because your voice matters, and your story deserves to be heard. The awakening is real, the rise is inevitable, and the impact is unstoppable. Stay blessed always.